Jason sat quietly in the corner of his favorite coffee shop, his eyes staring out the window at the steady rain falling outside. The world seemed far away, the sound of the raindrops almost like a gentle melody, calming him as he sipped his warm drink. It was the kind of day where you didn't want to think too hard about anything. He liked the peace, the comfort of being alone with his thoughts, the soft hum of conversations around him blending with the noise of the coffee machine. But deep down, Jason felt empty. Life had been moving fast and he hadn't quite caught up yet. He had a job, friends, and a roof over his head, but there was something missing. A spark, a sense of purpose. He couldn't quite put his finger on it. He had been coming to this coffee shop for months, but today felt different. It was as though the atmosphere was somehow thicker, filled with an energy he couldn't explain. Jason's eyes wandered around the room, taking in the familiar faces and the chatter. That's when she walked in. It wasn't the door's familiar chime that caught Jason's attention. It was her. She entered the coffee shop as if she belonged in a place where everything else stood still. Her presence was undeniable. She was tall, with long dark hair that cascaded over her shoulders like a waterfall. The soft light from the overhead lamps seemed to make her glow, as though she had walked out of a dream. Jason's heart skipped a beat, and for a second, it felt like the whole room had faded into the background. She was dressed in a long, elegant coat, the color of deep midnight blue, and as she moved to the counter, Jason noticed the way she carried herself, graceful, confident, almost as if she owned the space around her. There was something magnetic about her, something that made everything around her seem unimportant. Jason couldn't stop looking. He tried to look away, but his eyes kept being drawn to her. She ordered her coffee in a soft, measured voice that seemed to float across the room, and Jason found himself listening intently to every word, every syllable. It wasn't just what she said, but the way she said it. There was an effortless elegance in the way she spoke. As she waited for her coffee, she glanced around the room, and for a brief moment her eyes met his. Jason froze. His heart raced in his chest and his palms felt sweaty. He quickly looked away, embarrassed at how obvious he had been. He hadn't meant to stare. He had never meant to make her feel uncomfortable. But it was too late. She had seen him, and he had seen her. Jason could feel the tension in the air, even though nothing had been said. It was as though the world had shifted ever so slightly. He hoped she wouldn't think he was some kind of creep. His thoughts were scattered, and his mind was filled with so many questions that he couldn't answer. Did she notice him? Was she bothered by his stare? Did she even care? He tried to focus on his coffee, but his thoughts kept racing. He hadn't spoken a word to her, yet he couldn't shake the feeling that something important had just happened. He had seen many people in this coffee shop before, but none of them had made him feel the way she did. She wasn't just another face in the crowd. She was something else, something that captured his attention in a way he couldn't explain. A few moments passed, and Jason dared to glance back at her. She was sitting by the window, her back turned to him. The rain outside created a soft backdrop as she sipped her coffee, her eyes lost in thought. For a moment, Jason wondered if she had even noticed him at all. But in that brief second, he realized something. He had never felt this drawn to anyone before. It wasn't just her looks, though she was undeniably beautiful. It was something deeper, something that made him feel both nervous and excited at the same time. Jason didn't know why, but in that instant, everything about his world seemed to shift. He had been waiting for something to wake him up, to make him feel alive again. And now, in the presence of this stranger, he felt it. A spark, a connection. It was a feeling he hadn't experienced in a long time, and it scared him. He didn't know what to do with it, didn't know how to act on it. But as he sat there, watching her, he knew one thing for certain. His life was about to change, and it had everything to do with her. The rain continued to fall outside, and for the first time in a long while, Jason felt like something beautiful was about to happen. Jason had no idea what it was, but something about Arya was impossible to ignore. It had been a week since that first moment when their eyes met. He had returned to the coffee shop every day since then, hopping for another glimpse of her, but each time he came, he told himself it was just a coincidence. He had no real reason to believe she would come back again. Yet, deep down, a small part of him hoped she would. That afternoon, as Jason sat at his usual corner, the coffee shop buzzing with the sounds of quiet conversations and soft music, the door opened once again. His heart skipped when he looked up to see her walk in. There she was, Arya. She was dressed in a light gray sweater, her hair cascading down in waves, her eyes scanning the room. Jason quickly looked down at his coffee, trying not to be obvious, but it was too late. Her gaze caught his the moment she stepped inside. For a brief moment, time seemed to stop, and the only thing Jason could hear was his own heartbeat thundering in his chest. He felt his palms grow sweaty, and before he could stop himself, he blurted out the first thing that came to mind. "You have the most perfect shape I've ever seen." The words hung in the air like a thick fog. Jason's heart sank into his stomach. His eyes widened in horror as he realized what he had just said. His face burned with embarrassment and he quickly looked away, praying she hadn't heard him. He couldn't believe it. He had just spoken out loud a thought he had kept to himself for days. It was supposed to stay inside his head, but now it was out there in the open for her to hear. Arya didn't say anything at first. There was a long, unbearable silence between them. Jason felt like the world was spinning around him, but he couldn't move. He couldn't breathe. He had no idea what to do next. Then, much to his surprise, Arya didn't seem upset. She didn't storm out or look at him with anger. Instead, she smiled, a soft, almost knowing smile. It was the kind of smile that made Jason feel even more unsure of himself. He couldn't figure her out. What did that smile mean? Was it kindness or something else? To his shock, she walked over to his table, her movements calm and deliberate. She didn't sit down, but she stood there, looking at him with a gaze that seemed both curious and understanding. Her eyes softened, but there was still an unreadable quality about her. "Did you really mean that?" she asked quietly, her voice calm, not judgmental. Jason was stunned. He hadn't expected her to say anything at all. He had expected silence or, at best, a polite thank you before she walked away, but this was different. Jason cleared his throat, trying to gather his thoughts. I didn't mean to say it out loud," he stammered, still feeling like an idiot. "It just came out. I didn't mean to make it sound weird or anything." Arya's smile grew slightly, but this time there was a glimmer of something else in her eyes. She leaned in just a little, her gaze intense but not unkind. "Tell me, Jason," she said softly, using his name for the first time. "Why is it that you said that? What is it about me that made you say something like that?" Jason swallowed hard, his mind racing. What was she asking? Why did it feel like this was more than just a conversation about a compliment? He wasn't sure how to answer her. It was hard to explain how he had felt the moment he saw her, how her presence affected him in a way that he couldn't quite put into words. "It's just," Jason struggled to find the right words. "You're different. It's not just the way you look. It's the way you carry yourself, the way you seem to be above everything around you. I don't know how to explain it, but it's like you have this strength even in how you move. I can't take my eyes off you." The moment the words left his mouth, Jason wanted to take them back. He felt exposed, vulnerable. Why was he being so honest? He had never been this open with anyone, especially not with a stranger he barely knew. But Arya didn't look uncomfortable. She didn't look offended. Instead, she seemed to be considering his words carefully, like she was absorbing them. After a few moments of silence, she finally spoke again. "I see," she said, her voice thoughtful. "So, it's not just my shape you were admiring, but how I present myself, how I move through the world." Jason nodded, too afraid to speak. The weight of the moment felt like it was pushing down on him, but it was also strangely freeing. For once, he wasn't hiding behind walls. He was telling the truth, even if it was hard. Arya's smile softened further. She took a small step back, and Jason felt a sense of relief, though he couldn't quite understand why. "You're the first person who's ever said something like that," she said quietly. "Most people just focus on the surface, on what they see, but there's more to me than that, more than what you can see right now. Jason felt a wave of guilt wash over him. Had he reduced her to just her appearance? Had he been one of those people who only saw the surface? He opened his mouth to apologize, but Arya gently raised a hand to stop him. "It's okay," she said, her voice soft but firm. "I don't mind. I just want you to know that there's always more to a person than what meets the eye." For the first time, Jason understood that Arya was more than just her outer beauty. There was something deeper about her, something strong and unspoken, and it made him feel small in the best way possible. Arya smiled one last time, then turned to walk away. Jason sat there, stunned. He hadn't expected any of this. He hadn't expected her to speak to him at all, let alone open up like this. He didn't know what it all meant, but he felt something inside him shift. Maybe, just maybe, this moment would be the beginning of something that would change everything. And for the first time in a long time, Jason felt like he was ready to learn more, to discover what lay beyond the surface. Jason couldn't stop thinking about Arya. It had been 3 days since their conversation, and the words she had said to him kept echoing in his mind. "There's more to me than what meets the eye." Those words felt heavy, like they had opened a door to something he didn't understand but needed to explore. Jason had always been the kind of person to keep to himself, never diving too deep into the lives of others. But with Arya, it was different. There was something about her that drew him in, something he couldn't ignore. Every day he returned to the coffee shop, hoping to see her again. It wasn't just her looks, though they were impossible to deny. It was the way she carried herself, the strength she seemed to have hidden behind her calm exterior. Jason had never met anyone quite like her, and it was unsettling in a way. The way she seemed to understand people, the way her words lingered in the air long after she'd spoken them. He knew he had to speak to her again, to understand what was going on in her mind, to learn about the person behind the mysterious aura. On the 4th day, Jason's heart skipped a beat when he saw her again. Arya walked in, just as he had hoped. She was wearing a black jacket and dark jeans, looking effortlessly beautiful, but there was something different in her eyes today. They seemed a little more distant, a little more guarded. She didn't look like she was in a hurry to interact with anyone, and Jason couldn't help but wonder why. As Arya moved toward the counter, Jason stood up from his seat. His legs felt shaky, his heart thumping loudly in his chest. He knew he needed to speak with her again, but the fear of saying the wrong thing weighed on him. What if she didn't want to talk anymore? What if he had said something that pushed her away? Without thinking, Jason walked up to the counter where she was ordering her drink. She glanced up, and for a moment their eyes locked. There was a flicker of recognition in her gaze, but it was different this time. Jason could feel the walls she had built around herself, and it made him feel small. "Hey," he said, his voice unsure. I wanted to apologize for what I said the other day. I didn't mean to make you uncomfortable." Arya didn't react immediately. She took her time, letting the silence hang between them, and Jason felt his nervousness grow. "It's not that," Arya said finally, her voice soft but firm. "It's not what you said. It's that you thought you had to apologize for speaking your mind, for seeing me for who I am." Jason blinked, confused. "What do you mean?" She gave a small sigh, looking down at her coffee cup for a moment before looking back at him. "I get it. People think it's weird when someone notices more than just the surface, when they see beyond the appearance, beyond what everyone else sees. But the truth is, I don't need anyone to apologize for that." Jason felt like he was missing something, but he was too afraid to ask. Instead, he just nodded, feeling the weight of her words sink in. "I didn't mean to make it sound like I was only interested in your looks." Arya's eyes softened as she stepped closer to him, her voice quiet. "You didn't. But sometimes people like me are only seen for what's on the outside. It's easy to assume we're all the same, beautiful on the outside, empty on the inside." Jason's heart tightened at her words. He could hear the pain behind them, the frustration in her voice. She wasn't just talking about herself. She was talking about how people viewed her, how they only saw the surface and never bothered to look deeper. "I understand," Jason said, his voice sincere. "I really do. I didn't know how to say it. I didn't mean to make you feel like that." Arya gave a small, knowing smile. "You didn't make me feel anything. I've been dealing with people who only see the outside for years. I've learned to live with it." Jason felt a knot in his chest. He didn't know why, but it made him angry. Angry at the world for treating her like that. Angry that people like him, people who were too afraid to speak out, too afraid to really understand, had made her feel like she was nothing more than her appearance. "Arya," he said, his voice growing more confident, "I want you to know that I see you, not just your shape but everything about you, the way you carry yourself, the strength you have. You're not just what people think you are." Her eyes widened slightly, surprised by his honesty. She stood still for a moment as though she were weighing his words carefully. Finally, she spoke, her voice soft but filled with something deeper. "You don't know what that means to me, Jason," she said quietly. "To be seen for who I am, not just what I look like. Thank you." Jason felt a wave of relief wash over him. The tension that had built up between them seemed to melt away. It was the first real conversation they had, the first time he felt like he was actually connecting with her, not just admiring her from afar. But even as the weight lifted from his shoulders, Jason knew this was only the beginning. There was more to Arya than she had let on, and he was just starting to see it. As she turned to leave, she looked back at him with a smile that was softer, more genuine. "Maybe one day, we can talk more about what's behind the surface," she said, before walking out the door. Jason stood there, watching her leave. He didn't know what would happen next, but for the first time in a long while, he felt like he was on the verge of something important, something real. And he wasn't going to let it slip away. The next few days passed in a blur for Jason. He found himself walking through life in a daze, his mind constantly returning to Arya. Their conversation in the coffee shop had left him with more questions than answers, and he couldn't stop thinking about her. Each time he thought he had figured out a piece of her, another layer would appear, something deeper and more complex. Jason kept coming back to the coffee shop, hoping to see her again. It wasn't just because of her beauty, though that was undeniable. It was something more. It was the way she made him feel like he was finally waking up. When he was around her, everything else faded into the background. The worries, the stress of everyday life, they all seemed so small in comparison to what he felt when he was near her. And yet there was something that kept him distant, something that prevented him from truly connecting. He could see it in her eyes. There was a part of her she hadn't shared with him yet, a wall she had built that kept everyone at arm's length. He wanted to break through that wall, but he didn't know how. He didn't want to push her, but he also didn't want to lose the chance to get to know her better. On the fifth day he came in as usual, taking his seat by the window. He was lost in thought when he heard the familiar sound of the door opening. He didn't even need to look up to know who it was. He felt it, that shift in the air. It was Arya. She walked in with her usual grace, but this time something was different. There was a quiet intensity about her, a seriousness that made Jason's heart race. She didn't see him right away. She went straight to the counter and ordered her drink, her back to him. Jason's hands trembled slightly as he reached for his cup, wondering if this would be the moment he finally spoke to her again. He didn't want to come off as too forward, but he couldn't ignore the pull he felt toward her. For a few long seconds, he debated whether or not to approach her. His heart was telling him to go, to seize the moment, but his mind was filled with doubt. What if she didn't want to talk? What if she regretted their last conversation and didn't want to revisit it? But before he could talk himself out of it, Arya turned around, her eyes meeting his. This time there was no hesitation. She smiled, the kind of smile that spoke volumes. There was warmth in it, but also something more, a quiet understanding. She walked over to his table without saying a word, sitting down across from him as though they had known each other for years. Jason felt his breath catch in his throat. The air around them seemed to thicken, and for a moment he couldn't think of anything to say. The tension between them was palpable, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It felt like an unspoken connection, one that had been building ever since that first glance. "So," Arya began, breaking the silence, "what have you been thinking about since the last time we talked?" Jason blinked, surprised by the directness of her question. It wasn't what he had expected, but somehow it felt like exactly what he needed. He had been waiting for a sign, a push, and now here it was. "I've been thinking about you," he said honestly, his voice steady. "I've been thinking about how you made me realize that there's more to people than what we see. I've spent so much of my life looking at the surface, never really seeing what's underneath. And now I want to know more about you, about everything." Arya's eyes softened, and for the first time Jason saw a flicker of vulnerability in her gaze. It was subtle, but it was there. It made his heart ache, knowing that she had been carrying something inside of her, something she hadn't shared with anyone else. He wanted to reach out to help her carry that weight, but he knew he couldn't force it. She had to be ready to share it when she was ready. "You don't know everything about me," she said quietly, her voice almost a whisper. "But I think you're starting to understand that I'm not just the way I look. I've been through things, Jason. Things that have shaped who I am, things that most people never get to see. And I'm not sure if I'm ready to share all of it with you. But I want you to know that I appreciate the fact that you're seeing me for who I really am, not just the version everyone else sees." Jason felt a surge of emotion rise up in his chest. He didn't have all the answers, and he knew that he couldn't rush her into opening up. But hearing her words, hearing the raw honesty in her voice, made him feel like they were getting closer to something real, something he had never experienced before. "I don't want to push you," Jason said softly, his eyes locked on hers. "I just want to be here for you. Whenever you're ready to talk about whatever it is you've been through, I'm not going anywhere." Arya looked at him for a long moment, her eyes searching his face, as if trying to read him. Finally, she nodded slowly, a small smile tugging at the corners of her lips. "Thank you," she whispered. "That means more to me than you'll ever know." Jason felt a wave of relief wash over him. The air between them had shifted again, but this time it felt like they were on the same page. There was still so much to learn, so many layers to peel back, but he wasn't afraid anymore. Whatever came next, he was ready to face it, with her. For the first time, Jason felt like he truly understood what Arya had meant when she said there was more to her than met the eye. She wasn't just a mystery. She was someone who had survived, someone who had strength in ways Jason couldn't even imagine. And now, he wanted to be a part of that journey. Arya stood up to leave, but before she walked away, she turned back to him. "Maybe we'll talk more soon," she said, her voice soft but filled with a quiet hope. Jason watched her walk out of the coffee shop, his heart lighter than it had been in days. He didn't know what the future held, but one thing was certain. He was no longer just watching from the sidelines. He was part of this story now, and that thought filled him with something powerful: hope. Part 5: The Awakening. Jason found himself coming back to the coffee shop every day. It had become his routine, a quiet space where he could think and reflect. But it wasn't just the coffee or the peaceful atmosphere that drew him in. It was Arya. He couldn't explain it, but there was something about her that had changed him. Every time he saw her, something inside him stirred. He couldn't help but feel a connection, a pull toward her that was stronger than anything he'd ever felt before. But this wasn't just about attraction. It wasn't just about the way she looked or the way she carried herself. It was deeper. It was the way she made him feel like he was truly seeing her, not just her appearance, but the person behind the mask. Jason still didn't know everything about Arya, but he was beginning to understand more than he had before. She was complicated, layered, and far more than what anyone else had ever seen. And the more he thought about her, the more he realized that he wanted to be the one who saw all of her, the good and the bad, the strong and the vulnerable. He wanted to be the person she could trust, the one who didn't just admire her from a distance but who was willing to stand by her, no matter what. One afternoon, Jason was sitting at his usual table sipping his coffee when the door opened. He didn't have to look up to know it was Arya. He could feel it in the air, the way the atmosphere shifted the moment she walked in. She was different today, though. There was a weight to her step, a heaviness in the way she moved. Her eyes, which were usually bright and clear, seemed clouded, distant. Jason's heart tightened as he watched her make her way to the counter. He could tell something was off. Something had changed. He wanted to go up to her to ask if everything was okay, but he hesitated. He didn't want to intrude, but the concern he felt for her was stronger than his fear of saying the wrong thing. After a few moments, he stood up and walked toward her. As he got closer, she turned to face him. Her expression was guarded, like she was trying to hide something, but the vulnerability in her eyes couldn't be masked. "Hey," Jason said gently, his voice soft. "Are you okay?" Arya gave him a small, tired smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. She shook her head slightly, as though she was trying to brush off whatever was weighing on her. But Jason could see through it. He could always see through her. There was something inside her that was breaking, and he could feel it. "I'm fine," she said, but there was an edge of sadness in her voice. "Just a lot on my mind." Jason didn't buy it. He could feel that there was more, that she was carrying something heavy, something she wasn't ready to talk about. But he didn't want to push her. Not yet. "Look," Jason said, his voice calm and steady. "You don't have to talk about it if you're not ready. But if you ever want to, I'm here. You don't have to go through it alone." Arya looked at him for a long moment, her eyes searching his face, as though trying to decide whether or not she could trust him. Finally, she sighed, her shoulders slumping as if she had been holding her breath for too long. "You're right," she said softly. "I've been carrying this weight alone for so long. I don't know how to let it go." Jason stepped closer, not wanting to crowd her but wanting to offer his support. "You don't have to carry it all by yourself. Sometimes, just talking about it, it can help, even if it's just with someone who cares." For the first time, Arya's expression softened. She seemed to relax just a little, as though his words had cracked through the armor she had built around herself. She didn't say anything at first, but the silence between them wasn't uncomfortable. It felt like a moment of understanding, a quiet agreement that they didn't need words to know that they were there for each other. Finally, Arya spoke, her voice quiet and almost hesitant. "There's a lot of pain I carry with me, things from my past that I don't talk about, but every time I start to open up, I get scared. I'm afraid of being judged, afraid that no one will understand. I've kept it inside for so long that it feels like a part of me now, and I don't know how to let it go." Jason felt his heart ache for her. He had no idea what she had been through, but he could see how much it hurt her to even think about it. He knew that whatever it was, it had shaped who she was today. And even though he didn't have the answers, he knew that he wanted to be there for her. He wanted to help her carry that weight, even if just a little. "You don't have to let it go all at once," Jason said gently. "You don't have to do anything you're not ready for, but when you're ready, I'll be here. You don't have to face it alone." Arya looked at him, her eyes searching his face as if looking for something. For a moment she seemed unsure, but then her expression softened. Slowly she nodded. "Thank you," she whispered. "I don't know why, but I feel like I can trust you." Jason smiled, though it was small, and filled with the warmth of knowing that he had started to break down the walls she had built around herself. He didn't have all the answers, and he knew he couldn't fix everything. But he also knew that being there for her, truly being there, was a start. As they stood there in silence, Jason realized that this was the moment he had been waiting for. This was the moment when they could begin to move forward, together. And for the first time in a long time, Jason felt like he wasn't just waiting for something to happen. He was a part of something real, something that had the potential to change everything. And that was enough for now. Jason had never been the type of person to rush into anything. He liked taking his time, getting comfortable with his surroundings before opening up. But everything about Arya felt different. Ever since their conversation at the coffee shop, Jason couldn't stop thinking about her. She had gotten under his skin, and no matter how hard he tried to distract himself, his thoughts always returned to her. He came back to the coffee shop every day, almost as if he were waiting for something, waiting for Arya to walk through that door again. And every time she did, it felt like the world paused for a moment. There was something about her that made everything else seem less important. But today, as Jason sat at his usual table, his mind was restless and his eyes constantly darted to the door. The last time they spoke, Arya had seemed distant, like there was something she wasn't saying. She had that look in her eyes, a look that told Jason she was carrying a burden. And so, when the door finally opened, Jason's heart skipped a beat. Arya stepped inside, looking more beautiful than ever. But something was different today. She wasn't smiling like she usually did. Her expression was softer, more distant. Her eyes weren't bright with confidence, but rather clouded with something Jason couldn't quite put his finger on. He watched her walk up to the counter, her posture a little more closed off, her shoulders slightly hunched as though she was carrying a weight on them. Jason's instincts told him something was wrong. He felt the need to reach out to talk to her, but he hesitated. He didn't want to invade her space, not when she seemed so guarded. As he sat there, he realized how much he wanted to help her, to show her that she didn't have to carry whatever it was alone. She wasn't just someone who looked perfect on the outside. She was someone who had a past, a story, and maybe even a pain that no one else could see. And he wanted to know that story. Jason couldn't wait any longer. He stood up, his heart racing, and walked over to her. She hadn't noticed him yet, lost in her thoughts as she waited for her coffee. He hesitated for a moment, taking a deep breath before walking up to her. "Hey, Arya," Jason said gently, his voice low but filled with concern. Arya turned to face him, her eyes locking with his. The moment their gazes met, something shifted. There was a hesitation in her expression, like she was trying to decide whether or not to let him in. Her lips curled into a faint, tight smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Hey," she replied softly, her voice quiet, almost hesitant. "How are you?" Jason noticed how her voice lacked the usual warmth. It was as though she was holding back, and that small change made his chest tighten. He couldn't let it go. He needed to know what was wrong. "Actually," Jason said, stepping a little closer, "I've been thinking about you, about what you said the last time we talked." Arya looked down, avoiding his gaze for a moment. Her fingers tapped nervously on her cup, and Jason could see the shift in her body language. She was uncomfortable. He knew he had to be careful with his words. "I know you're carrying something," Jason continued, his voice softer now. "You don't have to tell me what it is, but if you ever want to talk, I'm here. You don't have to go through whatever it is alone." Arya's eyes flickered up at him, studying his face as though trying to decide if she could trust him. There was a long pause, and Jason began to feel like he had crossed some invisible line. Maybe she wasn't ready to open up. Maybe she would push him away. But then slowly she took a deep breath and spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't talk about it," she said. "I've been carrying this weight for so long that it feels like part of me now. I don't know how to let it go. Every time I try to talk about it, I get scared." Jason's heart broke a little at her words. He could see it in her eyes, the fear, the pain, the exhaustion of holding onto something that had clearly been with her for far too long. He didn't know what she was going through, but in that moment, he knew he couldn't let her face it alone. "You don't have to let it go all at once," Jason said quietly, his voice full of understanding. "You can take your time, but I'm here for you, Arya, whenever you're ready." Arya's gaze softened, and for the first time, Jason saw a flicker of something in her eyes, vulnerability. It was only a brief moment, but it was enough to make him feel like they were finally breaking down some of the walls she had built around herself. She wasn't completely closed off anymore. "I don't know why I'm telling you this," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "But you're the first person who's ever really asked. Everyone else just sees the outside, the face I put on. But you actually see me." Jason stepped a little closer, his heart pounding in his chest. He wanted to say something comforting, but he didn't need to. The silence between them felt full of understanding. It felt like they were on the verge of something real and raw, and it scared him. But it also made him feel more alive than he had in a long time. Arya took a deep breath and finally looked him in the eye. "Maybe one day I'll be able to talk about it," she whispered. "But for now, just knowing that you're here, it means more than you know." Jason smiled softly, relief washing over him. "I'll be here whenever you're ready, Arya. No rush. Just know that I'm not going anywhere." She gave him a small, tentative smile, her eyes still holding a trace of sadness but also something else, something hopeful. For the first time, Jason saw a glimmer of the person behind the walls she had built, and it made him want to know more. As Arya turned to leave, she paused for a moment, then looked back at him. "Thanks, Jason," she said, her voice filled with quiet gratitude. Jason watched her walk out of the coffee shop, feeling a sense of purpose settle in his chest. He didn't know where this journey with Arya would take him, but one thing was clear. He wasn't just waiting for something to happen anymore. He was a part of something real, and that was enough for now. Jason didn't know what had changed, but he could feel the shift in the air. It had been a week since his conversation with Arya, and everything felt different. The walls she had built around herself were still there, but they felt less impenetrable. They had shared something that day, a connection. And even though she hadn't spoken much about her past, there was a sense that she was starting to trust him. That feeling had left Jason both relieved and nervous. He was afraid that whatever Arya was carrying might be too heavy for him to help with. But at the same time, he couldn't help but feel an overwhelming urge to try. He had been coming to the coffee shop every day, hoping to see her again. Every time she walked in, his heart would race, but this time there was something different about the way he looked at her. He didn't just see the outer beauty that had initially caught his attention. Now, when he looked at her, he saw strength, pain, and vulnerability all mixed into one. He saw the woman behind the perfect appearance, and for the first time, he understood how much that meant to him. On the 8th day, as he sat in his usual corner, he saw her. Arya walked in, her steps a little slower than usual. Her eyes were distant, and her shoulders were slumped, as if the weight of something was dragging her down. Jason felt his chest tighten. He wanted to go to her, but there was a hesitation in the air. He didn't know what she was going through, but he had learned enough to know that pushing her wasn't the answer. She went to the counter, her eyes scanning the menu as if lost in thought. Jason watched her from afar, wondering what was going on in her mind. It was like she was carrying something so big that she couldn't hide it anymore. And yet, she still tried. Without thinking, Jason stood up and walked toward her. His heart was pounding, but he didn't care anymore. He had to know what was going on. He couldn't just stand by and wait. He had to be there for her. "Arya," he said softly as he approached her. She turned to face him, and for a moment their eyes locked. There was a flicker of recognition in her gaze, but it quickly faded, replaced by the same guarded look that had been there before. She forced a smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Hey," she said, her voice low, "what's up?" Jason took a deep breath. He didn't know how to start, but he couldn't ignore the concern he felt. "I've noticed something," he said quietly. "You've seemed different lately. You don't have to tell me what's going on, but I can tell that you're struggling. And I just want you to know that you don't have to carry it alone. Whatever it is, I'm here for you." Arya looked at him for a long time, her eyes searching his face. She seemed to be weighing his words, as though deciding whether or not she could let him in. After a moment, she sighed deeply, her shoulders sinking as if a weight had been lifted. She stepped closer, lowering her voice even more. "I've been trying to keep it together," she began, her words almost a whisper. "But it's hard. I've never really told anyone about what happened. It's something I've carried with me for so long, and I guess I just got used to keeping it hidden." Jason stayed silent, giving her the space to speak. He didn't want to rush her, but his heart ached for her. Whatever it was clearly something she had been holding in for years. Arya's eyes dropped to the floor, her hands gripping the edge of the counter. "It's not easy to talk about," she continued, her voice shaky. "But I feel like I can trust you. I don't know why, but you make it feel like maybe I don't have to keep pretending anymore." Jason's chest tightened as he listened to her. He wanted to reach out and comfort her, but he stayed still, giving her the space she needed. The pain in her voice cut deep, and he couldn't imagine what she had been through to get to this point. She took a deep breath, gathering her courage. "When I was younger, I went through something that changed me. It's been a part of me for so long that it feels like I can't escape it. And for the longest time, I thought if I just ignored it, if I just kept pretending everything was fine, it would go away. But it never did. It's always been there, haunting me, and I don't know how to get rid of it." Jason felt his heart break for her. He didn't know the details, but he didn't need to. He could hear the pain in her voice, the burden she had carried alone for so long. And for the first time, he realized just how strong she was. To survive something so painful and still keep going, it was something he admired deeply. "You don't have to keep carrying it by yourself," Jason said gently. "I'm here, Arya, and you don't have to go through this alone." She looked at him, her eyes filled with both fear and hope. It was like she was seeing him for the first time, really seeing him. "I don't know if I'm ready to share everything," she whispered, "but just knowing that you're here, it means more than you could ever know." Jason smiled softly, the warmth in his chest spreading. He didn't have the answers, and he didn't need to. All he wanted was to be there for her, to show her that she wasn't alone anymore. Arya nodded, her shoulders relaxing just a little. "Maybe one day," she said, her voice stronger now, "I'll be able to tell you everything, but for now this is enough." Jason smiled, feeling a sense of peace settle over him. He didn't need to rush. They would take it one step at a time. And for the first time in a long while, Jason felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be, with Arya. Part 7, The Powerful Ending. Jason woke up the next morning with a sense of quiet anticipation. The conversation he'd had with Arya the day before kept replaying in his mind. For the first time, she had truly opened up to him, just a little, and it felt like they were on the brink of something big. But there was still a lot left unsaid, a lot she wasn't ready to share. Jason understood that. He couldn't rush her, but knowing that she was starting to trust him, even a little, gave him hope. He had spent so many years walking through life without real connections, always keeping people at a distance. But with Arya, everything felt different. She had shown him a side of herself that no one else had ever seen, and that meant more to him than he could say. As the days passed, Jason continued to come to the coffee shop, hopping for another moment to talk to Arya. But this time he didn't rush to fill the silence between them. He waited, he listened. And when Arya did speak, it was like every word carried more weight than it ever had before. She would talk about small things, her day, the weather, the latest book she was reading. But Jason could hear the layers beneath her words. He could tell there was more on her mind, things she was still holding on to. Then one afternoon, when the sun was setting and the coffee shop was nearly empty, Arya walked in. There was something about her that felt different today, something more confident, more open. She spotted Jason immediately and gave him a smile. This time, it reached her eyes. Jason stood up to greet her, and as she walked over to him, it felt like the weight in the room had shifted. "Hey," she said, her voice warm but soft. "Can we talk?" Jason's heart skipped a beat. This was it. This was the moment he had been waiting for, the moment when she was ready to share her truth. "Of course," he said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. He gestured for her to sit down, and as she did, Jason could feel the air between them crackling with an unspoken tension. Arya took a deep breath and looked at him, her eyes clearer than they had ever been. "I've been thinking about what we talked about," she began, her hands gently resting on the table in front of her. "About everything I've been carrying and how I've been hiding it. For so long, I convinced myself that if I didn't talk about it, if I just buried it deep enough, it would go away. But it didn't. And you've shown me that maybe it's okay to finally let it out. Maybe I don't have to keep pretending like everything's fine." Jason didn't say anything at first. He simply watched her, his heart swelling with pride for her courage. Arya had always been strong, but now, sitting across from him, Jason saw her strength in a new light. She wasn't just the beautiful woman with a perfect exterior. She was a survivor, a person who had been through things Jason could never imagine, and yet still had the strength to face another day. He wanted to be there for her, to be a part of her journey, no matter what that meant. "Arya," Jason said softly, his voice thick with emotion, "I don't know what you've been through, but I want you to know that I'm not going anywhere. Whatever you decide to share, whenever you're ready, I'll be here. You don't have to carry it alone." Arya's eyes glistened with unshed tears, but she smiled through them. "Thank you, Jason. I don't think you understand how much it means to me that you're here. I've spent so long keeping people out, pushing them away, because I didn't want anyone to see how broken I was. But you," she paused, taking a moment to gather herself, "you've made me realize that it's okay to be broken. It's okay to ask for help." Jason reached across the table, gently placing his hand over hers. The warmth of his touch seemed to calm the storm that had been brewing in both of them. "We're all a little broken, Arya. It's what makes us human. And you don't have to fix everything right away. You don't have to carry it all on your own anymore." For a long moment they sat in silence, just holding each other's gaze. In that silence, Jason felt like he was finally seeing Arya for who she truly was, flawed but beautiful, strong but vulnerable. And it was in that vulnerability that Jason realized something important. She had given him a gift, the gift of her trust. And that was more valuable than anything else. "I think I'm ready to start sharing," Arya said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know how or when, but I want to try. I don't want to hide anymore." Jason smiled, his heart full. "And whenever you're ready, I'll be here, for whatever you need." The tension in the air melted, and for the first time in a long while, Jason felt truly at peace. Arya was opening up to him, little by little, and that meant more than words could express. They didn't need to rush. They didn't need to have all the answers. The most important thing was that they had each other. As Arya stood up to leave, she turned to Jason, her eyes shining with a quiet strength. "Thank you," she said again, her voice filled with gratitude, "for seeing me, for not giving up." Jason stood too, watching her walk toward the door. She had shown him something he hadn't known he was missing: the power of vulnerability, the courage to let go of the past, and the strength to move forward. And as she stepped out into the world, Jason knew this was just the beginning of something real, something beautiful. And for the first time in his life, he felt like he wasn't just standing on the sidelines, waiting for something to happen. He was part of something, something that was finally starting to make sense. And that was enough for now.